They surrounded her car like vultures circling prey. 5 HOA board members in their pressed khakis and matching clipboards, demanding she remove the unauthorized pet from their pristine community immediately. The woman behind the wheel didn't say a word, just reached slowly for something in her glove compartment. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper, something these suburban enforcers couldn't possibly understand. The German shepherd beside her sat perfectly still, ears alert, eyes scanning the crowd with the kind of focus that comes from years of specialized training. But the HOA president didn't see training, he saw defiance. He saw someone breaking their sacred no pets policy in broad daylight with witnesses recording everything. What he didn't see, what none of them could possibly know, was the small patch sewn into the dog's vest hidden beneath a lightweight cover. When she finally pulled out the paperwork, they expected surrender, maybe an apology, or at least some explanation about why she thought the rules didn't apply to her. Instead, she did something that made the entire group step back in stunned silence. She reached over and gently pulled away the fabric covering her dog's working vest. The words embroidered there weren't what anyone expected to see. The HOA president's clipboard hit the pavement. The woman recording on her phone lowered her camera in shame. And the veteran behind the wheel finally spoke her first words in 20 minutes with a voice that carried the weight of battles they'd never fight and scars they'd never bear. But by then it was too late. The damage was done, and the entire neighborhood was about to learn what happens when you mistake invisible wounds for rule breaking. Welcome to Heartland Tales, where we share the moments that remind us who we really are beneath the surface. Before we continue with this powerful story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support our growing community. We're here because these stories matter, and your support helps us share them with the world. Meadowbrook Commons looked exactly like every other planned community built in the last decade. Identical driveways curved around matching mailboxes, while perfectly manicured lawns stretched between houses that differed only in their shutters' color. The Homeowners Association took pride in maintaining what they called community standards, which really meant making sure nothing disrupted the carefully crafted illusion of suburban perfection. Sarah Martinez had lived there for 8 months, now choosing the quiet neighborhood because it promised peace after years of chaos she couldn't explain to neighbors. She kept to herself, emerging only for grocery trips or medical appointments that multiplied each passing month. Her house at Maple Ridge Courts and sat apart from others, surrounded by trees, offering the privacy she craved. The HOA noticed her, of course they noticed everyone. Sarah followed every rule, paid fees on time, never caused trouble. Her lawn stayed green, paint stayed fresh, garbage cans disappeared by noon every collection day. To most residents, she was invisible, which was exactly how she preferred it. The only difference was occasional sightings of her walking with a large German shepherd early mornings before people were awake. Nobody questioned it. Initially, dogs were common enough, even with official policies requiring registration and strict guidelines. But as weeks turned to months, residents began whispering. The dog was always off leash, they said, even though it never strayed from Sarah's side. It didn't play with other dogs, chase squirrels, or show interest in usual canine distractions. Some neighbors found this unusual enough to mention at HOA meetings where policy enforcement concerns surfaced with increasing frequency. Margaret Thornfield, the HOA president, had been elected 3 consecutive terms because she treated community guidelines like constitutional law. She'd eliminated lawn ornaments, enforced uniform mailbox heights, and personally inspected every exterior improvement, ensuring compliance with aesthetic standards. In her mind, association strength came from consistency, everyone following identical rules without exception or excuse. When complaints about Sarah's unregistered dog reached Margaret, she saw it as straightforward. Rules existed for reasons, and allowing one resident to ignore them would create precedent for chaos. She'd handled dozens of similar situations with professional efficiency, review violation, issue notice, provide compliance time, escalate, if necessary. She had no reason to believe this case would differ. The first notice arrived Tuesday, tucked into Sarah's mailbox between pizza advertisements and carpet cleaning flyers. Language was formal but clear: all pets must be registered with HOA office within 10 days or face fines and legal action. Sarah read it twice, then set it aside on her kitchen counter, joining medical bills and appointment reminders she hadn't organized. She meant to respond, but calling the HOA office felt overwhelming in ways ordinary tasks had become since discharge. Phone calls meant explanations, and explanations meant reliving experiences she'd spent months trying to forget. So she did what she'd learned with most civilian complications, ignored it hoping it would resolve somehow. Margaret received no response, which meant either preparation for compliance or deliberate defiance. Protocol demanded follow-up action. She scheduled a Saturday morning drive through Maple Ridge Court to observe the violation firsthand and document it for potential legal proceedings. That morning, Margaret found Sarah loading grocery bags while the German Shepherd sat motionless beside her, watching everything with alert professional attention. The dog's posture struck Margaret as oddly formal, almost military in precision, but she attributed this to basic obedience training. What mattered was clear violation of community policy happening in broad daylight with no concealment or compliance attempt. She parked across the street, opened her official HOA violation notebook, and began documenting time, location, description of unauthorized pet, and photographic evidence. As she wrote, Margaret felt familiar satisfaction from maintaining order, enforcing standards, protecting property values through consistent rule application. This was exactly what HOA existed to handle. But as she prepared to approach Sarah directly, Margaret noticed something that gave her pause. The dog never moved from position, never shifted attention, never showed interest in anything except Sarah herself. Its focus was absolute, unwavering, almost protective. For just a moment, Margaret wondered if there might be more than simple rule violation. The thought passed quickly, replaced by determination to handle this with professional thoroughness she applied to all HOA business. She closed her notebook, straightened her blazer, and walked across the street to address what she saw as clear-cut policy noncompliance requiring immediate resolution. Margaret approached with confident stride, her clipboard held like authority's shield. Behind her, Patricia Williams and Robert Chin followed, both board members who'd spotted what Margaret termed the ongoing pet situation during their morning neighborhood patrol. Sarah saw them coming, and her breathing changed subtly, becoming controlled and measured. The German Shepherd noticed, immediately shifting closer without moving from seated position. Its ears stayed forward, alert but calm, while eyes tracked the group with professional assessment. The dog appeared attentive, but something in its posture suggested readiness beyond neighborly conversation. "Excuse me, ma'am," Margaret called out, her voice carrying practiced HOA authority. "I need to speak about your unregistered animal. I sent a notice last week, but received no response regarding compliance with community pet policies." She stopped close enough to establish authority, but maintained appropriate social distance. Sarah finished placing her grocery bag inside, then turned to face the group. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried, despite obvious tension from HOA representatives. "I got your notice," she said quietly, voice steady, but lacking defensive edge most residents displayed when confronted. "I've been meaning to call, but things have been complicated lately." "Complicated or not, our policies exist for everyone's benefit," Patricia chimed in, consulting her own clipboard for relevant regulations. Pet registration protects property values, ensures proper vaccination records, and maintains community standards. It's really quite simple. You just need to fill out the forms, provide proof of vaccinations, and pay the registration fee. Robert nodded in agreement, adding, "We've had several complaints about dogs running loose in the neighborhood. Residents are concerned about safety issues, especially with large breeds like this one." He gestured toward the German Shepherd, which hadn't moved, but seemed to be listening to every word with unusual attention. "Some people are uncomfortable around big dogs, particularly when they're not properly restrained or supervised." Sarah's jaw tightened almost invisibly, but her voice remained calm when she responded, "My dog doesn't run loose, and she's never unsupervised. She's with me constantly, and she's extremely well trained, as you can see." As if to demonstrate this point, the German Shepherd adjusted its position slightly, maintaining perfect alignment with Sarah's stance without any visible command or signal. Margaret sensed resistance and decided to escalate her approach accordingly. "Ma'am, I appreciate that you feel your pet is well trained, but our policies don't make exceptions based on individual assessments. Every resident must follow the same rules regardless of personal circumstances. If you don't complete registration within the next 48 hours, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action through our association attorney." The threat hung in the air like smoke while Sarah processed the implications. Legal action meant court appearances, meant questions about her background, meant exposure of private medical information she'd fought hard to keep confidential. It meant explaining things to strangers who would never understand why some battles continue long after the war ends. The weight of it all pressed down on her shoulders like equipment she could never fully remove. Legal action seems excessive for a paperwork issue, Sarah said, carefully choosing her words to avoid escalation while maintaining her position. I understand you have policies, but maybe we could discuss this reasonably without involving attorneys. She glanced down at the German Shepherd, which remained motionless except for its eyes continuing to scan the group with professional awareness. Patricia stepped forward, sensing what she interpreted as weakness in Sarah's response. Ma'am, we're trying to be reasonable here, but you've had multiple opportunities to comply with our clearly stated policies. We can't maintain community standards if we allow residents to ignore regulations simply because they find them inconvenient or excessive. The word inconvenient triggered something in Sarah's expression, a flash of something harder than simple frustration. The German Shepherd noticed immediately its posture, shifting almost imperceptibly into higher alertness, though it maintained perfect position and discipline. You think this is about convenience, Sarah said, her voice still quiet, but carrying new undertones that made the HOA representatives unconsciously step back. Margaret felt the shift in atmosphere, but misinterpreted it as growing defiance rather than something deeper and more complex. Ma'am, I don't know what your personal situation is, and frankly, it's not relevant to HOA policy enforcement. What matters is compliance with rules that every resident agreed to follow when they purchased property in this community. Your circumstances, whatever they may be, don't exempt you from those obligations. Robert nodded, emphatically adding, We've been more than patient with this situation, but patience has limits. Other residents are watching to see how we handle policy violations, and we can't appear to play favorites or make arbitrary exceptions. It sets a bad precedent and undermines the entire system of community governance. Sarah's hand moved almost unconsciously toward the German Shepherd's head, stopping just short of contact. The dog's eyes never left the HOA group, but its breathing synchronized with Sarah's, as if they shared some form of silent communication beyond normal human-pet relationships. You want to see her paperwork, Sarah said finally, her voice carrying a strange mixture of resignation and something else the group couldn't quite identify. Margaret brightened, sensing imminent victory. Yes, exactly, that's all we need, proper documentation showing registration, vaccinations, and compliance with community standards. Once you provide that information, this entire situation can be resolved quickly and amicably. She raised her clipboard as if preparing to check off another successful policy enforcement action. Patricia and Robert exchanged satisfied glances while Margaret continued, I have the registration forms right here in my folder, so we can complete this process immediately if you're ready to cooperate. It really doesn't have to be complicated, we just need everyone following the same rules for the good of the entire community. But something in Sarah's expression suggested this wasn't going to be the simple compliance victory the HOA representatives expected. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still, perfectly positioned, perfectly aware, while Sarah reached slowly toward her car, not for registration forms, but for something else entirely, something that would change everything the HOA thought they knew about their neighbor and her extraordinary companion. Sarah's hand moved deliberately toward her glove compartment, while HOA representatives waited expectantly for registration paperwork that would never come. The German Shepherd's attention intensified, though position remained unchanged, every muscle ready despite appearing relaxed. The atmosphere shifted from routine policy enforcement to something far more significant. You want to see her credentials, Sarah said quietly, withdrawing not forms, but a small leather folder, unlike typical pet documentation. You want proof that she belongs here, that she's legitimate, that she has the right to be by my side. Her voice carried undertones that made Margaret unconsciously step back. Margaret nodded confidently. Yes, exactly, we just need proper documentation to complete records and resolve this according to established guidelines. She held her clipboard ready while Patricia and Robert positioned themselves to witness expected surrender to HOA authority. But instead, Sarah knelt beside the German Shepherd and gently lifted lightweight fabric covering the dog's working vest. Beneath plain exterior covering, intricate patches became visible, including words that made the HOA group freeze in stunned recognition of their catastrophic misunderstanding. The vest bore official insignia reading, "Service Dog, Do Not Pet, Handler Disabled Veteran," along with certification numbers and medical symbols clearly identifying this as no ordinary pet, but highly trained medical assistance animal. Additional patches indicated specialized training in PTSD, response mobility assistance, and medical alert capabilities. Margaret's clipboard fell from nerveless fingers clattering against pavement while her face drained of color. This wasn't policy violation, this was federal civil rights issue involving protected categories she'd unknowingly violated. The legal ramifications could destroy HOA insurance coverage and expose every board member to personal liability. Patricia gasped audibly, covering her mouth as she realized their threatening behavior toward a disabled veteran with a legitimate service animal had been witnessed by multiple neighbors and potentially recorded by security cameras. Robert took several steps backward, his own legal background making him instantly aware of the discrimination lawsuit they'd just created through their ignorant and aggressive actions. "Oh my God," Margaret whispered, staring at the service dog patches with growing horror as she understood how badly they'd mishandled this situation. "We didn't know, we had no idea, you never told us she was a service animal." Her voice cracked with the realization that their by-the-book enforcement had become a civil rights nightmare with potential federal implications. Sarah remained kneeling beside her service dog, her hand finally making contact with the animal's head in a gesture that was clearly both comforting and communicative. The German Shepherd leaned slightly into the contact while maintaining its alert posture, its training allowing it to provide support while remaining ready for whatever might be required next. "Her name is Luna," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying exhaustion that came from battles the HOA couldn't begin to comprehend. "She's been with me for 3 years since I came back from my 3rd deployment in Afghanistan. She monitors my heart rate, alerts me to anxiety attacks, helps me navigate crowds, and keeps me functional when the world becomes too overwhelming to handle alone." The words hit the HOA representatives like physical blows, each revelation making their earlier aggression seem more unconscionable. Margaret struggled to find words while Patricia began crying silently as she realized how their rule enforcement had targeted someone whose service to their country had earned protections they'd trampled through. Ignorance and suburban authoritarianism. Robert was the first to recover his voice. "Ma'am, we sincerely apologize. We had absolutely no idea about your situation or your dog's status as a service animal. If we'd known, we would never have approached this situation the way we did. This is entirely our fault, and we take full responsibility for this terrible misunderstanding." But Sarah wasn't finished revealing the depth of their error. "You asked about registration and documentation," she said, reaching into the leather folder to withdraw official papers that made the HOA's requirements seem trivial by comparison. "Luna is certified through the Department of Veterans Affairs, registered with the American Kennel Club as a service animal, and protected under federal disability rights legislation." She held up documents bearing official seals and signatures from military medical personnel, while continuing in the same quiet voice that somehow carried more authority than all their clipboards combined. "She has more credentials than most people, more training than most professionals, and more legal protections than this HOA even has the authority to question. But you never asked about any of that, did you?" Margaret found herself unable to speak while Patricia and Robert exchanged terrified glances as they realized their threatening behavior toward a protected disabled veteran could result in federal discrimination charges that would destroy not only their HOA positions, but potentially their personal finances and professional reputations. The neighborhood had begun to take notice of the confrontation, with several residents emerging from their houses to observe the unusual gathering in Sarah's driveway. Some held phones, clearly recording the interaction, while others simply watched with growing awareness that something significant was unfolding among their carefully maintained suburban routine. Luna remained perfectly positioned beside Sarah, providing the steady presence that had kept her handler functional through countless civilian challenges since returning from combat zones where mistakes had consequences far beyond HOA violations. The dog's training allowed it to sense Sarah's emotional state, while maintaining readiness to intervene if the confrontation escalated beyond manageable levels. "I never registered her with your HOA because federal law doesn't require it," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as she reclaimed control of the situation. Service animals are exempt from pet policies, housing restrictions, and registration requirements. They're medical equipment, not pets, and they're protected by laws that supersede your community guidelines. The legal education continued as Sarah outlined federal protections that the HOA had violated through their aggressive enforcement approach, while the board members realized their amateur legal threats had opened them to professional liability they were completely unprepared to handle. Their suburban authority meant nothing when confronted with federal disability rights legislation backed by military service records. Margaret finally managed to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. What can we do to fix this situation? How can we make this right? The question carried desperate hope for resolution of a problem that had grown far beyond their community governance experience or legal expertise to handle without professional help. But before Sarah could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles announced the arrival of additional witnesses to this suburban confrontation that had revealed the difference between policy enforcement and civil rights violation, between community standards and federal law, between assumptions and reality, in ways that would forever change how Meadowbrook Commons understood the invisible battles fought by those who live among them. David Chun, a retired Air Force colonel, arrived first, having heard about the confrontation through the Neighborhood Veteran Network. Behind him came Maria Rodriguez, a civil rights attorney from the adjacent development, called by a neighbor who recognized the legal implications unfolding in Sarah's driveway. David approached with measured stride, while Maria carried professional confidence from handling federal discrimination cases. Their presence shifted atmosphere from suburban policy dispute to something with broader implications and consequences. Is everything all right here? David asked, though his tone suggested he understood the situation. His eyes moved from Sarah to Luna, recognizing the service dog's vest and professional posture from military experience with working animals in combat. Margaret attempted to regain authority. We're handling routine HOA matter regarding pet registration. But her voice lacked conviction as she realized how pathetic their concerns sounded to people who understood federal law and military service. Maria stepped forward, extending her card to Sarah while addressing the HOA group. I'm Maria Rodriguez with Civil Rights Legal Center. I wanted to ensure everyone understands federal protections involved when service animals and disabled veterans are concerned. The words federal protections hit the HOA board while Sarah accepted the card with gratitude. Having professional legal support appear spontaneously felt like salvation after months of navigating civilian bureaucracy designed to exhaust rather than assist transitioning veterans. David knelt beside Luna, speaking quietly to Sarah about the dog's training, while demonstrating respect for service animals from understanding their role in keeping handlers functional. She's beautiful work. How long have you been partnered? He asked, using terminology showing familiarity with veteran service animal community. 3 years this month, Sarah replied, her voice steadying as she connected with someone who understood without requiring explanations about invisible wounds or battles with civilian systems, promising support while delivering bureaucratic obstacles. Maria addressed the HOA directly. Service animals are exempt from all pet policies, housing restrictions, and registration requirements under Americans with Disabilities Act and Fair Housing Act. Any attempt to enforce pet policies against service animals constitutes disability discrimination with serious legal consequences. Margaret finally found voice to offer genuine apology. Sarah, I am deeply sorry for how we handled this. We had no understanding of your service or Luna's role. We completely mishandled this and want to make it right however we can. Sarah looked at Luna, who remained calm, providing emotional support that allowed her handler to respond with grace despite stress and humiliation from people who should have been neighbors rather than adversaries. I don't need apologies, Sarah said quietly. I need understanding that not all disabilities are visible and not all service is recognized by those who benefit from it most. Luna helps me function in a world that often feels hostile, and your policies can't override federal laws protecting disabled veterans. As confrontation transformed into community building, Sarah felt Luna relax the service dog, recognizing reduced threat levels while maintaining readiness. Neighbors who gathered began dispersing with new understanding of the veteran living quietly among them and the extraordinary animal making her civilian life possible. Margaret picked up her clipboard, realizing effective governance required understanding residents' needs rather than enforcing policies without regard for circumstances or federal law. Sarah, would you help us revise guidelines to better accommodate service animals and disabled residents? The request for collaboration rather than compliance marked a fundamental shift in how the HOA approached community governance, while Sarah agreed to share her experience to prevent other veterans from facing similar discrimination when seeking peaceful civilian life in suburban communities. As the group prepared to disperse, Luna maintained her perfect position beside Sarah, providing the steady presence that had made this confrontation manageable despite its stress and potential for triggering anxiety responses that could have escalated beyond anyone's ability to resolve peacefully. David exchanged contact information with Sarah while Maria provided resources for disability rights and HOA policy development, ensuring that this suburban confrontation would result in positive changes rather than simply fading into another veteran's story of civilian misunderstanding and institutional failure. The morning sun climbed higher over Meadowbrook Commons as Sarah and Luna walked toward their house, surrounded by neighbors who now understood that heroism doesn't always wear uniforms, and that service continues long after deployments and in forms that most people never see or recognize. Margaret watched them go while holding documents about federal disability rights that would transform how their HOA approached community governance, with new appreciation for residents whose service to their country earned protections that superseded suburban policy enforcement and demanded respect rather than bureaucratic harassment. Sometimes the greatest battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in suburban driveways where ignorance meets service and federal law confronts local policy. Sometimes heroes wear civilian clothes and fight invisible wars with four-legged partners who provide strength that most people will never understand or recognize until they witness it firsthand. Sarah Martinez never asked for special treatment. She asked for basic understanding that her service dog was medical equipment, not a pet, that her disabilities were real though invisible, and that her service to her country earned protections that HOA policies couldn't override regardless of community standards or suburban enforcement priorities. But most importantly, she proved that education prevents discrimination, that community building requires understanding rather than enforcement, and that veterans deserve support from the neighborhoods they defended through service that continues to cost them long after their deployments end and their uniforms are stored away. Luna never needed recognition. She needed only to serve her handler with the dedication and skill that kept Sarah functional in civilian world that often felt more hostile than combat zones where rules were clear and service was understood by everyone who shared the mission. This story was brought to you by Heartland Tales, where we believe that understanding each other makes us stronger than any policy or regulation ever could. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition, but deserved more than anyone else? Someone whose invisible battles made your visible world possible in ways you never fully understood until it was almost too late? Tell us in the comments what they meant to you and how you remember their quiet strength. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel, because these stories matter and your support helps us share them with people who need to understand that heroism comes in many forms, including 4 legs and a service vest that protects freedoms most people take for granted. We'll see you in the next one, where we continue sharing Heartland tales that remind us who we really are beneath the surface of our everyday assumptions and community standards.